In the untamed American West, everything was wild and unrefined, and that included matters of intimacy. This period, famous for the United States expansion into the Southwest, was a time of striking contrasts. Fortunes were made, lives were lost, and sometimes both unfolded in dramatic fashion. Let's now journey into the captivating world of romantic encounters in the Wild West. First and foremost, prostitution was incredibly widespread. In the Wild West, there were an abundance of men and a scarcity of women, which led to prostitution becoming a prevalent way to satisfy the demand for companionship. Even though it was against the law, you could find prostitutes in nearly every town. There were madams who managed brothels, sophisticated courtesans who catered to wealthy patrons, and streetwalkers who earned their living in the dimly lit corners of the towns. Interestingly, some of these prostitutes and madams not only played significant roles in the lives of many, but also inspired tales that achieved legendary status in the folklore of the Wild West. Number 2. Embracing intimacy and companionship in a challenging world. In the midst of the harsh realities and uncertainties of life in the Wild West, the value of human connection became all the more apparent. Intimacy and companionship took on profound significance, offering solace and comfort in a world marked by danger and adversity. Whether through the bonds of friendship, romantic relationships, or even unconventional arrangements, people sought closeness and emotional support as they navigated the complexities of their lives. Life in the Wild West was exceptionally tough. People grappled with poverty and the unforgiving wilderness, all while dealing with the lawlessness of the era. Given these harsh conditions, these resilient individuals had little time for judgment. They recognized that in their challenging reality, unconventional aspects of intimacy were not to be frowned upon but seen as entirely normal. Life in the Wild West was too demanding for superficial moral judgments about matters of intimacy. Number 3. The challenge of controlling infections. Dealing with sexually transmitted infections in the Wild West was a formidable task due to limited medical knowledge and resources. The prevalence of prostitution and frequent intimate encounters made infections spread easily through communities. Two particularly widespread infections were syphilis and gonorrhea, and their impact on individuals' health was severe. Regrettably, effective treatments were scarce, causing immense suffering for those affected and adding to the sense of vulnerability in an already harsh environment. Number 4. The harsh reality of assault. The Wild West was indeed a brutal place and time. In some instances, such as with the Rufus Buck Gang, sexual assaults were shockingly sanctioned. In most cases, however, there was no justice for victims of assault, as many incidents went unreported. Sadly, rape was a crime committed by individuals of all races and nationalities. For women who experienced this unimaginable trauma, they often found themselves stigmatized and with limited options, leading some to turn to prostitution as a means of survival. It's essential to recognize that men, too, were subjected to sexual assaults within cowboy communities, with older and more powerful individuals victimizing younger cowboys. Number 5. Challenges in family planning. Birth control in the Wild West presented its own set of difficulties. Condoms were available, but they came with a hefty price tag and could only be ordered through mail. For many, planning ahead wasn't a strong suit, often leaving women to shoulder the responsibility of preventing unintended pregnancies. In their efforts to control family size, women frequently turned to herbal concoctions that contained potentially toxic elements like pennyroyal and ergot fungus. Pennyroyal, scientifically known as Hedeoma pelagioides, was consumed in the form of tea or tincture, with the hope of inducing an abortion, even though it carried the risk of severe liver and kidney damage. The ergot fungus, which infects rye, contained the alkaloid ergotamine, believed to cause miscarriages, but at the peril of inducing gangrene and convulsions. These pills and potions, advertised in newspapers, promised to restore a woman's monthly flow or sometimes, rather vaguely, remove any obstruction. Number 6. Embracing diversity in the Wild West. Homosexuality in the Wild West had a unique and surprisingly open acceptance. It wasn't a matter of concern or controversy. In communities of miners and cowboys, forming close same-sex relationships, sometimes referred to as bachelor marriages, was a common response to the scarcity of women. Men in the Wild West saw no shame in seeking comfort and companionship in one another when it came to romantic connections. In fact, it was quite pragmatic. During their social gatherings and dances, it was not uncommon for half of the men to wear white bandages on their arms, signaling their willingness to assume the more feminine role. In some old Wild West songs, you can even find lyrics about young men adopting women's names. Additionally, sharing sleeping quarters with fellow men was customary in cowboy communities, and younger cowboys often provided support to their older counterparts, fostering bonds that extended beyond just friendship. Number 7. The curious attitude towards intimacy in the Wild West. In the Wild West, certain aspects of intimacy were seen in a peculiar light. People of the era regarded certain practices as unconventional, unnatural, and even foreign. Perhaps one of the most curious perceptions was related to what is known as fellatio, or more informally, a blowjob. This intimate act was commonly associated with the French, and those who offered it were often given French names and spoke with accents. Consequently, the act itself came to be colloquially referred to as Frenching in the Wild West. Interestingly, many of the local prostitutes declined to engage in this practice, and they even distanced themselves from their colleagues who did. Number 8. Intimacy without seclusion. Privacy during romantic encounters was a rare luxury in the Wild West. Couples engaged in their amorous pursuits with family members close by, their moans and whispers of affection shared within the same bed. Only the wealthiest individuals in the Wild West could afford moments of intimacy behind closed doors. This meant that the majority of the population found themselves in situations where their romantic activities were witnessed by others. Consider the size of a typical log cabin, often measuring a mere 3 meters by 6 meters. It was quite common for families with as many as 10 members to inhabit such close quarters. Now, imagine attempting to have a private moment in such cramped conditions without anyone noticing. It's important to note that the concept of private intimacy is a relatively modern development, dating back to the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. For most of human history, children and other family members shared sleeping quarters with their parents, making personal privacy a rare occurrence. Number 9. Disguises were a common sight. Life in the Wild West was often perilous for women. It's no wonder that some women in the Wild West chose to dress as men, and their motives were crystal clear. It made traveling easier, offered safety, added an element of adventure, and helped them avoid unwanted attention. Among these fearless individuals, we find the remarkable figure of Calamity Jane, an iconic American frontierswoman known for her penchant for cross-dressing. Another noteworthy example is Little Joe Monahan, who took on roles as a gold miner, cowboy, and laborer. It wasn't until her passing in 1904 that the community discovered her true gender. She had lived as a woman in disguise for her entire life. During the 1850s in California, a time that embodied the spirit of the Wild West, nearly 90% of the population was male. Likewise, in other frontier regions of the United States, the number of men far outweighed the number of women. In response to this gender imbalance, some men also turned to cross-dressing. It was considered perfectly ordinary for men to dress as women, even taking to the dance floor with one another. One of the most celebrated instances of a man masquerading as a woman was the case of Mrs. Nash, the beloved laundress who served Major General George Custer's wife, Libby. It wasn't until her passing in 1878 that the community learned of her true gender, revealing that she had led a life disguised as a woman.